To our webinar, Proposal Writing in the 8-Second Attention Span. Your presenter today is Lisa Pafe, Vice President at Lohfeld Consulting Group and outgoing President of the APMP-NCA chapter. I'm going to turn it over to Lisa now. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. So I just wanted to mention to everyone that please feel free to link in with me on LinkedIn or follow me on Twitter. My LinkedIn page has hyperlinks to all of my publications and presentations. And also check out Lohfeld Consulting Group's website. We also have a lot of free content, blog posts, etc., available to you. So with that, let's get right into our presentation. Today's agenda, we're going to talk about the purpose of today's webinar. And then I'm going to give you some very interesting information on digital distraction and the impacts on the workplace. And then we'll talk about the impacts of bad writing. And from there, I'll discuss 3 strategies you can use in the digital age to improve your proposal writing and grab and hold the evaluator's attention. And we'll finish with some conclusions and, of course, time for Q&A. So our purpose is to figure out a way to grab and hold the evaluator's attention with great writing that clearly explains and validates our value proposition. Why do we want to do this? Well, it will improve our proposal quality and result in more proposal wins, because that's really the bottom line for us as proposal professionals. We want to have more proposal wins. So I'm sure you're aware that there's a lot of digital distraction 24/7. We not only have our desktop, laptop, we have tablets, we have smartwatches, we have smartphones. And this culture of constant connection takes a toll on us, both professionally and personally. We end up wasting time, attention, and energy on relatively unimportant information and interactions. We stay busy, but we produce little of value. In fact, Stanford University has conducted some studies that show that those of us who regularly juggle several streams of content, and that's probably many of us, do not pay attention, memorize, or manage tasks, as well as those who are able to shut off the tablet, the watch, the smartphone, and focus on one thing at a time. And it's basically resulting in reduced productivity and engagement. And the statistic you see on your screen that U.S. knowledge workers waste 25% of their time dealing with these huge data streams, it costs the economy $997 million annually. And that's according to a nonprofit consortium of business professionals, researchers, and consultants. If you can believe it, it's called the Information Overload Research Group. Yes, there's a research group devoted to information overload. So as a result, attention spans are decreasing. There was a pretty famous 2015 Microsoft study that said our attention spans are decreasing. In 2000, we had about a 12-second attention span. In 2015, 8 seconds. Who knows what it is in 2017? It might be 6 seconds. That's less than the goldfish. And they theorized that heavy multi-screeners find it difficult to filter out what's irrelevant, and they're more easily distracted. And those changes are the result of our brain's ability to adapt and change itself over time. And with all of these digital distractions, our weaker attention span is the end result. And interestingly, the mere presence of your smartphone, and I probably wager a bet that pretty much everyone has their smartphone right next to them now. The mere presence of your phone makes you less productive and less trusting. You're interrupted more easily and you take longer to learn material and you feel more stressed. And that's the same for proposal evaluators. And there are generational differences. Millennials and younger are more likely to scan and process information more quickly because of growing up with the internet and other digital media. They tend to be more likely to skip dense text. They want to get straight to the point. They're more responsive to the visual content. And also, they prefer a less formal and more conversational tone, which does apply to your proposals because proposals should not be written in too formal a manner, too full of jargon. They should be written in a professional yet conversational tone. The other impact of the internet is snap judgments. So internet users judge the aesthetic value of a website in as quickly as 1/50th of a second. And in that 1/50th of a second, they reject quality content if the visual effect is poor. Again, this applies to your proposals. If you have a poor visual effect in your proposals, even though you have good quality content, a lot of evaluators may turn away and pay less attention. So all of this is resulting in what's called disengagement. You see here a study from University of California that said knowledge workers typically attend to a task for 3 minutes before they get distracted. If that's not bad enough, it takes them 20 minutes to re-engage and return to the previous task. And studies have said, why is this? Well, you may have heard the terms FOMO and FOBO. FOMO is fear of missing out, and FOBO is fear of being offline. And all of these are forms of anxiety that actually border on the edge of obsession and compulsion. People are constantly checking all of their smart devices because they worry about receiving new information after everyone else, or that if they respond too slowly to a text or an email, they'll be too late. So it's important to understand that all of these digital distractions are making your proposal evaluators less likely to be fully engaged in your proposal. So the other problem, in addition to digital distractions, is bad writing. So a really interesting Harvard Business Review 2016 study said that most of us, we're knowledge workers, spend pretty much half our week just reading for work, and about a third of that is email. And they found that most of us write content that is either too long, poorly organized, unclear, full of jargon, imprecise. And in the study, they surveyed a full range of knowledge workers, and 81% agreed that poorly written material decreases productivity. Why? Well, in the first place, if you write something that's poorly written, you get to your pink team review, it has to be rewritten, right? So that wastes time. If it does make it through all the way to the evaluator, it may be misunderstood. So bad writing can have the result that the person reading the content doesn't understand it. And in our case, the reader will take the wrong action. In other words, the evaluator will not score your proposal highly because they didn't understand your writing. And then the final effect of poor writing is that it decreases trust. If I receive a proposal from you and it's poorly written, I'm not going to trust your company too much. This is the first product I'm seeing from your company. And if I consider it poorly written, my trust in your ability to do the work is going to go down. So really what we're seeing here is that fuzzy writing in the reader's mind or the evaluator's mind equates to fuzzy thinking. Inexact or passive language shows gaps in your thinking, what shows a lack of understanding of the customer needs and how your solution will meet or exceed their requirements. Conversely, if we present well-organized, active voice sentences that explain what is happening, what ought to happen, and what people need to do, in other words, that the evaluator needs to score your proposal highly, we're going to be more successful. So in this study from Harvard Business Review, they recommended clear writing as a way to build trust. And I'm not going to read you all of their recommendations, but a few really key takeaways for us as proposal professionals that I have certainly seen in the hundreds of proposal reviews that I've done. Try to keep your sentences shorter and to the point. A lot of us like to write very, very long sentences that are about the size of a paragraph. And a lot of times we use jargon and quote unquote fancy words to try and impress the reader or to make up for not really knowing what we're trying to say. So strive for clarity. And the other point that I think we all need to understand is that you can write. Don't argue that you're a bad writer. Just like any other skill, writing takes practice. You didn't just get up and walk when you were a baby. You had to practice. And it's the same way with your writing. So everyone can learn how to be a better writer. Everyone should understand that their first draft is never going to be perfect. It will need to be massaged, rewritten, etc. And we also need to get to the point. A lot of proposal writing buries the argument. In other words, we start out talking about how great our company is, and we bury the argument, our value proposition, so far down in the dense text that the evaluator can't even find it. So we have bad writing, we have digital distraction, and so with shorter and shorter attention spans, you can bet that most evaluators are not going to spend time trying to decipher your message. We've got to make our message clear. We don't want them to infer or conclude the wrong thing. So we have to figure out a way to get our message across clearly, succinctly, and quickly to avoid them just moving on. And another little interesting factoid, I was doing some research along these lines, and I saw some studies from Nielsen-Norman Group. They do a lot of research on human-computer interaction and things like that. And they said that we will visit a web page typically for 10 to 20 seconds, but so many of us don't even visit web page. We glance at our mobile device, whether that's a smartphone or a smartwatch, in even shorter micro sessions. So their point here is that it's only when you can clearly communicate your value proposition will the reader do more than glance. You want to get them to at least get to the point of skimming the text, right? So we need to figure out ways to attract the reader's gaze to do more than glancing, at least move on to skimming, and then possibly move on to actual reading. Although it does seem like actual reading, word by word, is going the way of the fax machine. And another key takeaway here, studies of government source selection boards found that a typical board member does not understand 75% of what they read in your proposal. Wow. So why is that? It could be a lot of different reasons. Maybe you're presenting it at too difficult a technical level, and some of the members of the evaluation board are not SMEs. It could be that you just write very poorly. It could be that they're digitally distracted, and when they're glancing or skimming at the text, they can't find the main points, so they misunderstand. It could be a combination of all of those factors, but that makes it even more imperative that we learn how to present our message clearly, succinctly, and in a way that grabs the evaluator's attention. So I've given you all this bad news about how the evaluator will not be paying good attention, will be distracted, will be less likely to be able to delve into the details of your proposal. Well, there are some strategies that we have for the digital age, persuasive, attention-grabbing techniques that are used a lot by digital marketers to grab and hold audience attention. So I'm going to talk about these 3 strategies. The first is calls to action. The second is exceeding expectations. And the third is clearly relevant writing. So what's a call to action? It's also known as CTA, and it's used extensively in digital marketing. Basically, the idea here is that you're going to put the right message in front of the right people at the right time. How does that apply to our proposal writing? Well, if you write a proposal and you don't even know who the right people are, in other words, who's going to be on the evaluation board, who's going to be the source selection authority, you're going to have a pretty tough time putting the right message in front of the right people. All of this, of course, goes back to capture. We can't really figure out what the right message is. We can't figure out what the customer values unless we've done our capture. We met with the customers, and I say that plural because there's never just one customer. We met with the decision makers. We figured out who's going to be on the source selection board to the best of our ability, who the source selection authority is going to be, and we vetted our message. So through a series of meetings, we vetted our solution, seeing how it resonates with the customer, and we've refined our message enough so that we're able to present the right message to the right people on the evaluation board at the right time, whether that's through our proposal or our oral presentation. So we have to know through our capture efforts which types of CTAs to use. And there are two CTAs we want to avoid. The first is a weak CTA. And this I see a lot in proposals I review. We assume the evaluator knows what to do. So we forget the call to action. In other words, we don't think we have to clearly state what our benefits are, what our strengths are. And we present a lot of features without benefits, or if we provide benefits, we fail to provide proofs. So it's a weak CTA. Conversely, we don't want to have too strong a CTA because that could offend the evaluator. We shouldn't make our message or our call to action high pressure. It's like we're trying to force compliance. And I'll give some examples of that in a moment. So the best CTA to use is when it's benefits oriented and personal. By personal, I mean knowing the customer, knowing their hot buttons, challenges, their risk aversion level, all of those things that will help us to make our message more personal. And so here's a few examples. A weak CTA might be, as the incumbent, we're best positioned for a low-risk transition. That's pretty weak because we're not really telling the evaluator what we want them to do, and we're not presenting any real proof points either. Too strong a CTA might be, unless you choose our incumbent team, the program will fail miserably. Basically threatening the evaluators that if they don't choose the incumbent team, you'll pack up your bags, you'll take all your people with you, and their program will fail. So the best CTA is one where we clearly present the benefits to the customer in a way that is worded also in terms of the customer's objectives. So third example says, to meet your objective of zero service disruption, you, the customer, need to select the team that offers 100% of the incumbents on day one. So those are some examples of tying it to the customer objective and telling them the best course of action. And a fun fact here, studies show that we believe something that we read 3 times. That's why it's so important in our proposals to introduce our message, to restate our message, and finally to summarize our message. We want the evaluator to remember it. And you might see this in advertising. I'm sure you've seen it in political campaigns. The first time they tell you something, you're like, okay, I haven't heard that before. The second time you say, oh yeah, I think I have heard that before. And the third time you say, oh yeah, that's true. Our second strategy in the age of digital distractions is exceeding expectations. So how do we do that, right? It's basically attention grabbers. So picture the evaluators, they're sitting locked in a windowless room. They have stacks of proposals to read. They pretty much are prepared for a long, boring, tedious day. So their expectation is pretty low. To exceed expectations, it's really all about strengths. Features that you propose with proven associated benefits that exceed requirements. Of course, exceeding requirements, again, goes back to capture. We need to know what the customer values. There's no point in exceeding their requirements in ways that are not important to them. So we need to figure out how can we exceed their requirements. Are there specific things that we can do, either through value adds, reducing risk, helping them meet their mission better, tied to ways that they would value. In other words, they would pay more for it, even though we are not necessarily charging them more. So how do you achieve a strength? A strength exceeds a contract requirement in a way the customer finds beneficial, and or it increases likelihood of successful contract performance, whether that's technical performance, schedule, cost, quality. It might increase likelihood of successful mission accomplishment, and or it could mitigate a mission or contract risk. But the final point is it has to be something that is not neutralized by other bidders in order to become a discriminator for your bid. Again, going back to capture, we need to know who our competitors are and what it is they're likely to propose to the customer. Because if we all have the same strengths, our strengths are basically just leveling the playing field. It's only when our strengths can rise above by being a discriminator that we're going to score more highly. And all of this ties to our value proposition, the clear, concise messaging of your discriminating strengths, ways that you alone exceed the customer's requirements, reduce risks, or help them meet their mission better. That's your value proposition. The value proposition is made up of your strengths. The winning bidder is going to have the best and possibly the most strengths. So let's give an example of a strength. Here's a strength statement. We have all the elements that would make up a good strength statement. We have a customer, we have a feature, we have a benefit, quantified it. The Department of Defense will decrease the risk of disruption with our proven incumbent capture plan that reduces required transition time 35% and captures 95% of incumbents proven in our last 12 transitions. So on face value, we might say, wow, okay, we're reducing the time of the transition. We're capturing 95% of the incumbents. This seems like it's definitely a strength. But again, repeating for the third time, it goes back to capture, right? Because what if we haven't vetted this with the customer and it turns out the reason they're rebidding this contract is that they don't like the incumbent staff and they want fresh personnel? What if they think it's ridiculous when you say that you can reduce transition time by 35% because you're going to be bringing in all new personnel that will need to go through security processing? So you can see how we can't just make up strength statements and make up ways we exceed requirements without having vetted it first with the customer and understanding what they value, what their hot buttons are, what their needs are beyond those just stated in the RFP. So exceeding expectations is all about surprising the evaluator. I mentioned that the evaluator is sitting in the windowless grill, huge stack of proposals to read. They expect to be bored with your dull writing, unsubstantiated bragging, hyperbole about how great your company is. We want to avoid these usual patterns. And they also expect to have to hunt for strengths. And this applies more in the federal space where evaluators need to identify strengths, weaknesses, deficiencies, and risks when they're scoring your proposal. So in order to justify an award decision, they're going to have to find your strengths. And a lot of times we don't bother to state our strengths clearly. Often nowhere in the proposal do we say that something we're proposing is a strength. So they cannot find a clear value proposition. So why is it so important for us to surprise the evaluator? Because on a biological level, human beings are programmed to expect and respond to patterns. And when you shake it up and do something that's not usual, that's going to delight in a way. So avoiding usual patterns, making sure we clearly state our strengths is a way to exceed expectations. So ask yourself, what if you wrote your proposal clearly and succinctly? Avoiding passive voice, jargon, hyperbole. What if the strengths popped off the page? And I don't just mean with great writing, but also with visual effects, icons, and other things that could make the evaluator find the strengths more easily. Of course, backed up with proof points. So I think it's important for us to understand that proposal writers are not technical writers. They're salespeople using the medium of writing. And it's through your attention grabbers that you can help illustrate your understanding of the customer. Instead of saying over and over again how you understand them, illustrate it. So here's some examples of different types of attention grabbers you can use in your proposals. A unique definition, a little known fact, a great customer quote, maybe a statement that's intended to challenge, but then you back it up with your proof points. Anecdotes and stories, and we're going to talk more about those in a moment. Questions followed by your answer. Distinctive graphics that are clear, really reach out to the audience. Icons and larger fonts. And we'll talk about that in a bit too. So when we use attention grabbers, that makes the hunt for the strengths, in other words, your value proposition, easier because those who are skimming can find it more quickly. And of course, we can use other ways to structure our proposal. Some main points can be basically gleaned from the table of contents. If we write good headings and subheadings, cross-references from the list of exhibits, if we write really descriptive titles and clear action captions from the graphics and action captions themselves, and using larger fonts where appropriate to call attention. And the use of larger fonts has been studied recently. Human-computer interaction studies that support using larger fonts, just one or two keywords, not all over the place, just here and there, to turn glancing and skimming into actual readings. It grabs the reader's attention. So we don't want to let the evaluator observe or conclude anything. We want to grab their attention, and we want to tell. So some examples of some of these attention grabbers: making a bold statement, like highest performance in a small package. That grabs your attention, and then you back it up with your features, benefits, and proofs. A little known fact: maybe you didn't know until you joined the webinar today that evaluators are likely to have an 8-second attention span. A question: do you want to decrease server deployment time from 4 weeks to 1.5 hours? That would grab my attention, and then I would read on. Statements intended to challenge, like you write boring, old-fashioned proposals. Customer quotes. Picking out a really great customer quote, like excellent customer service. Without your efforts to go above and beyond, we would have experienced disruptions, which would have cost us valuable time and money. And using powerful icons, that can also grab the evaluator's attention as well, and also train them. For example, the one on the left showing risk going down to the green level would train them that every time I see this icon, I'm going to find out how this company is going to reduce my risk. And here's an example of using effective graphics. Which graphic do you understand in 10 seconds or less? Because research shows that if an evaluator doesn't understand the gist of a graphic in 10 seconds, they will move on and not examine it any further. So sometimes making very simple changes, and studies show that using grids versus not using grids will make your graphics much more clear. And just in my review of numerous proposals, a lot of people use crazy arrows going all over the place. And if I can't even figure out where to start or where the arrows are going, I'm going to get confused and move on, versus using a clear grid pattern that makes the flow much more clear. And I mentioned good stories being very effective, telling stories, telling anecdotes in your proposals. Really interesting book written by a person named Nick Morgan called Power Cues. And he argues that in this age of digital distraction, in this information-saturated age, no one's going to hear you unless you tell stories. Yes, we have to have facts and figures. They're rational and important. But interestingly, they don't stick in our mind at all. If you can create some good stories, good anecdotes in your proposals, you're going to have a powerful advantage over other bidders. In some ways, we're almost hardwired to respond emotionally to a good story, and tying that in with your data will make your facts and figures, your proofs more credible. So something to think about is you can talk about problems you faced on similar contracts and how you solved them, talk about lessons learned in an anecdotal and interesting way. It's probably going to stick in the evaluator's mind more than merely giving them the facts and figures. And some of the tips from Nick Morgan's book that I found very, very interesting are on the screen here. So he says, start with your message, whatever that is, your discriminator, your ghosting example, your value proposition, by your employees and your company's own experiences. So if you're working on a proposal and you want to illustrate how you solved a problem, you're going to talk to the different employees that work on the contract and come up with a good story. At the same time, don't make yourself the hero. That can turn off the reader. So we don't want to just be bragging about how great we are. You tell a story in a human way, showing a problem that perhaps you struggled with and how you worked in partnership with your customer to solve it. And we want to highlight that struggle and how it turned into a lesson learned or a problem solved. At the same time, we want to avoid unnecessary details, anything that's irrelevant. And this happens a lot in our proposals. We talk about so many things that are not relevant to the main point, so many fluffy statements, so avoid that. Basically, stories create sticky memories by attaching emotions to things that happen. And those who can create and share good stories are going to do a lot better job of selling than those who just stick to the plain vanilla facts. So the final tactic is purely relevant writing. We've all heard the old adage, keep it simple, stupid. So it's not just that we should write clearly and succinctly, but it's also that we need to avoid details or embellishments that aren't relevant and dilute the message. We could write about a whole lot of things, but a subset of that is what the evaluator is really interested in. So keep your focus on the customer rather than your company. We need to set content boundaries, and this is something that is not up to the writer alone, right? This is something that has to be done during the submission when you're developing your content plan or your detailed annotated outline. You need to decide what to include and what to eliminate. And I would say that a lot of extraneous content gets in there because we tend to cut and paste, and we're cutting and pasting information in that might have been relevant to the previous customer, but isn't really relevant to this one. So we need to make content decisions early, allocating our strengths and value adds to the sections of the proposal that are ranked as of greater importance in the evaluation factors and subfactors, and making sure that we're highlighting our message in ways that it will score well. So here's an example of the relevance, and this is actually a real world example. Okay, this is a lot of fluff. So this one starts out, we appreciate the opportunity to submit our bid for continued service under the contract. We feel grateful to have served as a contractor since 2009 and look forward to continuing our unique partnership, which is based on multiple successes and increasing program enrollment. Our CEO has expressed a firm commitment to this program as a top corporate priority. As a result, we believe the solution we described keeps our history and experience in mind while continuing to build upon our efforts to address the department's current and future needs. What? Okay, so yeah, you fall asleep, right? And I don't think the evaluator appreciated reading that. We need to turn it around and make relevance relevant. Why are we bidding on this contract? The customer has a complex mission-critical program with multiple competing stakeholders statewide. Awarding to a new contractor will cause program disruption as building trusted relationships can take years. In the proposal that follows, we present our high-quality approach proven over the last 8 years to continued program success with zero risk of disruption. Okay, that is a lot more clear and makes it directly relevant to the reader. So one of the ways that we dilute our proposal is with using crutch words. If you go through your proposal and cross out all instances of we understand, we appreciate, we believe, we feel, and you'll see that the result is that your writing is a lot stronger. If you state what you understand, then they'll know you understand it. You don't need the crutch word of we understand. And these words actually weaken the impact of your writing and reduce the buyer's confidence level. And I would like to point everyone to an article written by Bob Lohfeld, the founder of Lohfeld Consulting. It's called 100 Words That Kill Your Proposal. This was the most downloaded article ever on Washington technology. And it's really pretty fascinating. I suggest you come to our website and get it, or Google it, download it. It has kind of a humorous tone to it, but you'll also recognize some of the crutch words you're using in your proposals. And we also want to avoid irrelevant bragging phrasals, saying things like we're best in breed, our approach is state of the art, we follow best practices, we're uniquely qualified, we're thought leaders. A lot of times we say these things with absolutely no substantiation, and the evaluator is probably rolling their eyes. So unless you can show the actual benefits and provide some substantiation that you are best of breed, don't say these types of bragging words. And another thing that adds to irrelevancy is redundant phrases. And the items that are in italics are the ones that could be removed here. So we don't need to say consensus of opinion. We could just say consensus. We don't need to say advanced planning, because planning is always in advance. We don't need to say close proximity, because close means proximity. And we don't need to say large in size. Those are just a few examples of ways that repetitive redundancy can make a negative impression on the reader. I notice I say it's a true fact. I don't need to use the word true. So really, what we want to do with our clearly relevant writing is tell them something they don't already know. Redundancy is, makes them say, well, that was obvious. So be careful about using words and phrases that are redundant. And some of the editing techniques that you can use to avoid irrelevance, we want to make sure that our paragraphs are well organized with a consistent tone. We want to use active voice. And a lot of folks say, oh, I use active voice. But then when you really read the proposal, you realize that they don't. They're using passive voice and they're not making it clear who the actor is. Studies have shown that passive voice makes your text much less memorable. If you state who's doing what, especially if you use the person's name, it not only is more memorable, but it builds the buyer's confidence level. We also want our text to be proportional. So by that, I mean the level of detail that we go into should be proportional to the customer requirements. In the federal space, we want to make sure it's proportional to C, the statement of work, or PWS, the instructions in Section L, and of course, Section M, which is going to tell you which evaluation factors and sub-factors are of importance and the order of the importance. So we want to make sure that we go into the level of detail that the RFP requires. Nothing is worse than providing only a few sentences to address a requirement that the customer prioritized and going into detail on items they did not prioritize. Of course, we want to make sure we're accurate. That goes back to making sure we're not using unsubstantiated bragging terms and well-written, avoiding the crutch words that you can read more about in Bob's article. So we've looked today at the distractions that we all face, whether we are the seller writing the proposal or the buyer evaluating the proposal. We took a look at the impacts of these distractions, especially when combined with poor writing, on the attention spans of the evaluators. And we went over 3 techniques to help you grab and hold the audience's attention in the digital age: calls to action, exceeding expectations, and clearly relevant writing. So I hope you've learned some tips for modernizing your proposals to win in the digital age. Because your customers are changing the way they read, you must also change the way you write. And with that, we have time for some Q&A.
Thanks, Lisa. This is Beth Wingate, president at Lohfeld Consulting. I've got a few questions to get us started off here. So first off, in your experience, do evaluators see the entire proposal or only sections? And if they're only seeing sections, how can we communicate our value proposition effectively if they read or skim only part of the proposal?
Yeah, that's a good question. And again, I'm going to start with capture. We need to learn about this customer. How do they evaluate proposals? Especially if it's a big proposal, it is quite likely to be divided up into sections. And that goes back to the point of repeating our clear message. So it may be that I have to repeat the value proposition in all the sections that I think are going to be divided up. Because if I simply refer to another section, the evaluator may never see it and may not get the understanding of the value proposition. So it is important to understand how your customer does their proposal evaluations. There are some customers that don't divide the proposal up. There are others that are. And then structure your value proposition and your discriminating strengths accordingly.
Okay, good points. Thank you. And an interesting point you made was you recommend using larger fonts as an intention grabber. But what if that isn't compliant with the RFP instructions? What do you do?
Yeah, so that, of course, is one of the issues we grapple with when we're writing proposals that have format instructions that don't necessarily make our proposal look that great, like having small margins or small fonts. So what I would recommend is using some white space around a keyword or key phrase. Maybe you could use the largest possible font, hold it, and somehow you leave enough, change the spacing around that word to make the font stand out.
Thank you. And then could you go over again what you mean by a strength? What are we trying to do there?
Okay, so the customer will have a requirement, and to tell them how we're going to meet the requirement, we need to present the feature. So by a feature, I mean it's a part of your offer, whether it's a process, a technique, a person, a system, a template. Those may be features you offer to the customer. We also have to present to them a benefit of that feature. And by the benefit, I mean the outcome of the feature. So as a result of using this system or leadership of this person or using this template, you'll enjoy a benefit. Maybe the benefit is reduced cost. Maybe it's increased customer satisfaction. Maybe it's improved quality. Maybe it's reduced error rates. So we tell them a feature and a benefit. And we, of course, have to back it up with evidence, some substantiation of how we've achieved this on similar contracts. So that's just meeting a requirement. But to get to the level of strength, we need to exceed a requirement. So if they, for example, they've set a service level agreement, that you have to have system uptime of 98%, and we can do system uptime of 99%, and we know through our capture efforts that would be something that they value, then we would highlight that as a strength. Or, for example, we can prove that our approach reduces their mission risk as proven on some other contracts. And we know from speaking with them that reducing risk is very important. So we highlight that as a strength. But it does have to be vetted during capture. An example would be, let's say we propose a new innovative technology that's going to be the greatest thing since sliced bread. It exceeds requirements. And we get our customer debrief and we find out they scored that as a weakness. That goes back to capture, not understanding their level of risk aversion. You may have customers who don't want to try a new innovative technology or new innovative technique because they're very risk averse. So in order to identify ways that we can exceed requirements or significantly reduce risk, we need to talk to the customer and understand what they value.
Okay, great points. Thank you.
It's been a great session today, Lisa. a lot of great information. I do believe that there is a little something for everybody. So hopefully everybody got a good takeaway. Thank you all for joining our webinar, Proposal Writing in the 8-Second Attention Span with Lisa Pafe. Thank you all very much, and I hope you have a great day.